everybody, and welcome to week 12 of lifespan development. This week we're going to be focusing on one of the last phases of life, late adulthood. And in this slide, I'm going to be answering some of your questions from last week. Starting with class questions. When will we need to hand in our next draft? Next week, next Monday, so November 16th, you need to hand in a draft so that you can participate in the peer review activity, which will be happening over the course of the entire week. When will we get our assigned peer essays? You will receive 2 essays in an email from me on the 17th. Are we going to do more exercises for the paper like we did this week in discussion? Yes, we're going to be doing a peer review exercise next week. Are we able to use the introduction from this week's discussion in our paper? Yes, that was part of the point of doing this exercise this past week on developing your own introduction, was so that you would have a really strong introduction for your papers. Can the page limit of the paper consist of more than 5 pages, or is it a 5-page limit? There is no limit on the number of pages. There is a minimum, and that is what is in the rubric, is a 4 to 5 page minimum. Really, it's a 5-page minimum. And that minimum is there because if you're writing less than 5 pages, you really haven't written enough to be successful in this project. In my experience, students who write less than 5 pages have not covered everything that they need to cover according to the rubric. So read the rubric, use that as your guide, and 5 pages absolutely is not a maximum. You can go as long as you want. Is our rough draft case study graded? No, you get points on your end project grade, so your lifespan case study project as a whole, for having turned in a draft and met with me. A lot of you have not met with me. If you have not, you need to email me. I'm no longer making special appointments, but I will set it up so that you can meet with me during office hours this week or next week. But it's very important that you meet with me. And so you need to email me if you haven't. Are you going to curve the final exam? No, for a number of reasons. The first reason is it's poor educational practice. Curving an exam means that usually it means that you've set up an exam that isn't fair, that nobody's going to do well on, and thus you have to curve it so that people do better than the points that they would have otherwise earned on the exam, and that's not good educational practice. I do review my exams after you've taken them, and if there is a question that seems unfair because literally no one got it right, I do throw it out. It doesn't count towards your grade, but I don't curve exams other than that. The other reason is you don't want me to curve your exams. Just trust me, you do not want that. Mathematically speaking, you wouldn't like it if I curved the exams. Can we study for the final together? Yes, absolutely. You are encouraged to study for the final together as class. You can set up your groups. I will also be holding a number of optional review sessions, starting with the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. And there will be one the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and then there will be another review session the week after Thanksgiving. For that one, I will send out a doodle poll, and people can sign up so we can kind of try and figure out the best time for the most people. But yes, there will be a number of review sessions, and then you're encouraged to work together for studying the exam. You cannot collaborate on the exam together. There's no working together on the exam, but when you're studying for the exam, absolutely, you should be working together. So that is it for the class questions, and now we're going to move on to the content questions. One of the videos in the lecture slides discussed how crystallized intelligence improves with age. Is this the same for fluid intelligence? It is not. So crystallized intelligence improves with age. It kind of does that over time. On the other hand, fluid intelligence does this over time. So it helps to think about it in terms of crystallized intelligence is the things that we already know. It's our memories. It's our already created skill set. Fluid intelligence is our ability to problem solve and retain new information. So as our crystallized intelligence goes up, our knowledge base goes up, our ability to retain new information and to logic goes down. and to problem solve with new ideas. Part of this is why older people often have a harder time learning how to use a computer, because that's completely outside of their skill set. They have very little in their crystallized intelligence to fall back on. So learning to use a computer is harder. Julian in the homework was showing this when he was unable to learn this new information that Sue was not on Loose Women. Whereas he was quite sure that she was he was quite sure that she was on Loose Women, not Light Lunch, because in his crystallized intelligence, he knew that Loose Women is a television show with a bunch of women sitting around a table chatting and talking about various topics. And he knew that she was on a show like that, so he put that together as Loose Women. He could not retain the new information, use his fluid intelligence to come up with, no, she was on Light Lunch, I need to put that in my memory. Do you think that everyone goes through a midlife crisis? Actually, very few people go through a midlife crisis. If you read the textbook, you'll know that only 10% of people go through a midlife crisis. So it's not very many people overall. Generally, as we hit middle age, we are contented with our lives. We are okay with it. We're okay with how things are going. So we don't have this midlife crisis. A person who has a midlife crisis tends to be someone who is very, very unhappy with how their life is going, what progress they've made towards their goals. Maybe it turns out that they don't want those goals that they set for themselves in early adulthood. Maybe it turns out that they're just not attaining those goals at all. Those are the people that have midlife crises, not the people that are happy, and that is the vast majority of people. Do fertility and length of fertility depend on genetics, or is it based on the individual? There is some individual differences in there. There's a lot of individual differences in there, but it is largely genetic. So we know that when a woman gets her first period is very much dependent on when her mother got her first period. It's genetic. And the same goes for how long you stay fertile. So your length of fertility is very much genetic, based on the other women in your family who have passed their genes on to you. Do you think that the changes we are going through with social media will impact self-concept in middle adulthood? Probably. We're already seeing that. We're seeing Gen X and the elder millennial generation who are hitting middle age. There's the cult of the mommy blog, and we are constantly hearing jokes and seeing things on the internet about how you can't do anything on the internet with your kids without mothers just tearing you apart. And that does have a major effect on our self-concept. If part of your self-concept is as a mother, and every time you post something about your kids online, a bunch of other mothers start tearing you apart, telling you that you're a terrible person and a terrible mother, and you're going to ruin your child and their future, that's going to affect your self-concept. You need to have a fairly high self-esteem to be able to go, no, I stand by my decisions. Because humans are social creatures, we want to fit in, so if everybody's piling on and saying that we aren't fitting in, that's a problem. So definitely social media is going to continue to have effect on our self-concepts. It has an effect on adolescent self-concept, early adulthood self-concept, and it definitely continues into middle age. It's just not particularly well studied yet because technology is still new, at least in terms of research. Can we possibly go over Levines Theory a little bit more? I'm a little confused on the stages and what exactly one goes through in the stages. So Levines Theory only covers adulthood. And basically he set it up so that there's early adulthood, middle adulthood, and late adulthood. And in between each of those, there are these transition periods of about 5 years where you're moving from the task of the previous into the task of the next stage. So in early adulthood, you're really focusing on the ideal self, who you want to be, what goals you want. You tend to focus either on family or on work. So a lot of people focus on both. There's no problem with that. But according to the theory, you tend to focus either on family or on work. And then as you age, as you get through your 20s and you start entering your 30s, you start entering middle age, you transition into an assessment period, which is kind of where the midlife crisis comes from. Remember, most people do not go through a true midlife crisis, but this is where the concept of midlife crisis comes from. You're reassessing in middle age whether or not the goals you set for yourself in early adulthood are where you want to be, where you want to go with your life. And then you're saying, okay, so have I achieved these goals? Are these goals that I stand by? If you focused on work and you feel like you're in a good place in your work life, you might alter your focus a little bit to be more family oriented. But on the other hand, you might say, okay, my family is where I want it to be, so now I'm going to focus more on my work life. Or you might say, hey, I'm happy, I'm just going to keep on keeping on. But really, that middle adulthood transition period is where you reassess whether or not you've attained your goals, whether or not you stand by those goals, and what you want to do next. Then the next assessment period happens at the end of middle age, where you're moving into late adulthood, you're starting to hit retirement age. So that point you start assessing whether or not you've had a good life and what you want to do for the rest of your life in terms of retirement, because you've kind of reached the end of your professional life. Probably your kids are older, they're heading off to college, so you're going to be an empty nester. So now you're at a shift point where you have to decide how you're going to spend the rest of your life. And so there's another transition period moving into late adulthood, and that's his idea, Levinson's idea of the seasons of life, where in early adulthood you set some goals, you work on achieving those goals. Then as you enter middle adulthood, you reassess whether or not those goals were worthwhile, if you've made sufficient progress, if you would like to keep those goals or set new goals. And then as you enter late adulthood, you reassess again based on the fact that you have reached the end of a life phase. Your children are getting older, you're retiring. What do you want to do for the rest of your life? And that is Levinson's seasons. Why is the idea of getting so old hard for some people to accept? Because we have a societal fear of aging, and it's not a necessary fear, but it is a fear. There's the cult of youth is a phrase that one of my professors used to use, where basically we all strive, when we're little, we strive to get older, we strive to be about like 18, 19, 20. And then we spend the rest of our lives trying to keep that youth, that 18, 19, 20 phase. Maybe 21, because then you can drink. But we spend all of our lives being told that we should be in our early 20s. So we spend all of our youth racing up to it, and then we spend as long as we can holding on to that age, not letting go, trying to be young for as long as possible, rather than understanding that there's nothing we can do to stop aging. And so we're better off just embracing it and being happy the age we are now. And that would be a far healthier way to look at it. I hope this has been helpful, and next week we are going to focus on death and dying and the peer review activities. I'm not going over the homeworks this week because you all did quite well on them, so I don't think we really need to, but if you have specific questions, I am happy to email you about them, so just shoot me a quick email. And don't forget, if you have not met with me and you would like feedback on your draft, you should email me about that.